Have some of us been a little too hard on Too Fast, Too Furious? Let's find out. Alright, we are back in the second installment of what I am calling Fast and Furious Reflections as we discuss the sequel to the 2001 original film, The Fast and the Furious, titled 2Fast2Furious, and wondering who was the deciding factor on that title. Now, of course, we have to acknowledge that at the time, we did not realize how instrumental this installment would be in the overall Fast and Furious franchise, and that's mostly due to the fact that I don't think any of us thought that the franchise would still be going in this, the year of our Lord, 2021. Now, after the overwhelming success of the first Fast and Furious, it made sense that Universal would want to capitalize on this and try to get a sequel in development as quickly as possible. The only problem was that they could not get back Vin Diesel to reprise his role as Dominic Toretto, as he was not a big fan of the script. Paul Walker was willing to come back, so focus shifted from being more Dom-centric to more Brian-centric, and here we find Brian O'Connor on the run from the feds, taking up refuge in Miami, where he has, strangely enough, become king of the street racing scene in that city. Now, even with Vin Diesel's absence, we still had a high-profile director stepping in to take the reins on Too Fast, Too Furious with John Singleton, of all people, who apparently was a big fan of the first film and said he could not pass up a chance to direct the sequel. And I have to say, even though I do not want to speak ill of the dead, and especially of a director whose other works that I've enjoyed immensely, it's hard for me to decide whether or not Too Fast, Too Furious is objectively good or bad, if I'm being perfectly honest. Remember back in the day when we all played Super Mario Bros. 2 and we all kind of noticed that there was something off about that game? Yeah, we still had a lot of enjoyment from playing it, and we were just kind of willing to rock with it because we were all kids and we didn't know any better. And then decades later, we would discover that the game we all played that we thought was supposed to be a sequel to Super Mario Bros. Was actually a completely other different game in Japan that was repackaged and repurposed and marketed to us as Super Mario Bros. 2. Yet another web of lies that we have to contend with. I don't know how you all are feeling, but I'm a little triggered right now. But I feel like this is the best way to talk about Too Fast, Too Furious, because there's so much going on in this film that just kind of feels off. I understand that, you want to try and do things differently with a sequel, so you're not just kind of rehashing beats from the first film, but there's kind of a line here that Too Fast, Too Furious is in danger of crossing in every other scene. You've got the switch in locale from LA to Miami, but you've got all of these other elements that feel almost like they're kind of Evil Dead 2-ing this film to an extent, because you have the character of Brian O'Connor, and they've kind of retconned him a bit, because if I remember correctly, the first Fast and Furious almost kind of positioned him as something of a novice when it came to street racing. You remember that whole scene where, even though he lost that first race against Dom and the other racers, he's grinning like a damn idiot because he almost had Dom. And Dom has to educate him on the fact that it doesn't matter if you win by an inch or a mile. Winning is winning. Almost having someone in a race like that doesn't count for shit. So now we have this character, let's say maybe about 18 months later, who is now just the absolute boss of all bosses when it comes to street racing in Miami. And I feel like there's so much that you're doing here to kind of position him as that, especially right down to the whole scene of his introduction into the film, where he's just pulling up in his car to the race line, and all the other racers are like, oh shit, it's Brian. As if there are years and years of him just tearing it up on the streets of Miami, and everybody knows about him. Like, he is at legendary status, and it makes not a lick of sense. To say nothing of the fact that Brian's doing all of this while being a fugitive from not only the LAPD, but also the FBI. He is a federal fugitive because he let Dom go at the end of the first film. And I'm just thinking to myself, the easiest way for you to get out of that situation, Brian, is to just lie. Like, that's all you have to do. You are a blonde-haired, blue-eyed, white man. This should have been the easiest situation for you to get out of, and I don't understand it at all. At worst, you would have spent 6 months riding a desk in the complaints office like Keanu Reeves in Street Kings. As for the story of Too Fast, Too Furious, Brian is cornered by one of those FBI agents he was working with in the first film to go undercover once again and try and take down a drug smuggler by the name of Carter Verone, because they're trying to figure out how he's getting his money into the United States, and it obviously requires street racing and someone who has a background in street racing. And Brian says to them that he is not cooperating with them at all unless he gets to pick his partner. And that partner ends up being Tyrese, playing Roman Pierce, who has a past with Brian and does not like him at all. Now, obviously, it's tough to match the energy that Vin Diesel brought in the first film, but I have to say that Tyrese as Roman Pierce was definitely doing his own thing and making it work for this film, because there's so much comedic energy that he's bringing to the table. There's so much intensity in scenes where he's angry at Brian and just sort of digging at him for all of the shit that happened in their past. And now you just kind of have this whole new dynamic where Brian is basically the one in charge. He's the one who's trying to be more of the cool, calm type. He's the one who's connected with everybody in the underground racing scene. And Roman is the one that's kind of coming in and being sort of ingratiated into this world, but at the same time, he still has his own swagger, his own personality, and can back it up. So you definitely have a different energy and dynamic between Paul Walker and Tyrese that I think is pretty enjoyable to watch in the film for the most part. Then you have other characters in the film like Tej, who was originally supposed to be played by Ja Rule, who had a completely different role in the first film, but he turned it down because he thought to himself, no, I'm bigger than this. I can do much better. You know, in a few years, I'll be starring in I'm in Love with the Church Girl, and I'll be set. Enter Ludacris. And damn it, if between him and Tyrese, you have something that is going to pay dividends in future Fast and Furious films, because right off the bat when these characters meet, it's great. They're kind of just sort of lightly ribbing each other, and it's very funny, just sort of that back and forth with them. And obviously that gets evolved and expanded on throughout the sequels to the point where they're just basically the Abbott and Costello of the Fast and Furious franchise, if we're, you know, drawing comparisons like that. And it's just kind of funny. But here you have Tej playing this character who runs all of the street races in Miami, and he's got his own garage, and he's just hooking up everybody however they need to be hooked up. And yes, I guess I should go ahead and let my sister know that I do kind of agree with her, and the fact that taking him from this sort of street hustler character to becoming an all-out hacker in the other films is kind of ridiculous. But again, this is the Fast and Furious we're talking about here, people. And it's funny because you can't really see anyone else playing that character, but damn it, if one of the other casting recommendations would have been something that I would have liked to see, and that would have been Brick City's own Redman. And I can tell you right now, I feel like for Too Fast, Too Furious, I think he might have been perfect. But given where the character goes in the subsequent films, I don't know if that's the same energy you kind of want. And I think staying with Ludacris is probably your best bet. And again, you've got his contributions to the soundtracks of multiple Fast and Furious films, starting with this one with Act the Fool. And yes, it's a great, banger of a track. This is something you can definitely see being played in a club, especially in Miami. And it just kind of goes to show where, sort of the music in these films is going, because you kind of have something that's definitely playing to the locale that they're in, and I think that that's something that definitely helps. And this is sort of moving away from more of the LA type of laid-back music that you would get out there. We're not relying too much on techno as we were before. We're doing a lot more with Dirty South hip-hop and things like that. So you definitely kind of see a change in the energy just from a music standpoint, which I think, again, is good for doing a sequel and not trying to repeat yourself, basically. We've also got Devin Aoki in there as Suki, who is a fellow racer in the Miami scene, and also maybe a love interest for Tej, although they don't really do much with it. And again, it is an instance of one of the actors in the cast having to learn how to drive over the course of the production, because this was the case with Jordana Brewster and Michelle Rodriguez in the first film, and it was also the case for Devin Aoki. And just thinking about Eva Mendes in this film, I mean, she's just oozing sex appeal in this role as an undercover customs agent who is working with Brian, and I just wish that she would be in things more, like in movies and television. I know she's busy being Mrs. Baby Goose right now, but I miss her, is what I'm saying. And to her credit, she's doing a great job in this film, because you kind of have this whole thing where Roman is in Brian's ear about her and saying not to trust her, and she kind of plays it really well, where you get a sense of, did she turn? Could she possibly be actually working with Carter Verone? You have a little bit of ambiguity to that, which I thought was a really nice touch to that character. So again, this is something that definitely works in the film's favor. And like Tyrese, who had worked with John Singleton in the past, we have Cole Hauser as Carter Verone, and he is just chewing up scenery in this film, and doing so in a kind of an understated way. He doesn't have big passionate moments where he's kind of doing anything akin to Scarface or something, which I'm thankful for, because I know any other filmmaker probably would have done that. So obviously there's a lot to like about this film, but there seem to be some who see it as a bit of a step down. And I'm sure there are some of you who may have always enjoyed the film immensely and are wondering why that may be. Now, I feel like a big factor in sort of people's perception of 2Fast2Furious boils down to the lack of Vin Diesel. It just has to be said, because there was so much energy and so much charm that man brought to the first film that I think that a lot of people were really hoping that he would come back for the sequel. And you kind of see it in the box office a little bit, because yes, while 2Fast2Furious ended up making more than the original film, that was mostly from the international grosses that they were getting, because this ended up making quite a bit less than the original Fast and Furious in the States. And it's a shame when you consider that 2Fast2Furious also had twice the budget of the original film. So you all have to balance that out when you sort of look at where this installment stands in at least the first two films. And even from a technical standpoint, I feel like the look of this film is definitely a step down from the first film, and I feel like a lot of it is due to obvious CGI cars being obvious. And I just think that overall, how it's shot, whoever was in charge of cinematography on this film, they kind of make it look like something being produced for MTV. And not for their theatrical film division, but for the actual MTV network. And that's kind of a problem. it looks like it's made for basic cable. It's surprising how this film costs twice as much as The Fast and the Furious and looks half as good. Like, I think that there's just, like, the approach to lighting scenes and, again, the overuse of CGI for some of the car scenes was just something that really sort of handicapped the film in a sense. And even though there are some great car scenes in the film, a lot of fun races and just some good action set pieces, especially that scene where they drive the muscle car from the pier onto Carverone's yacht at the end, I thought was phenomenal. And you also have things like the whole testing scene where they have to drive out on the freeway and you've got this one shot of Brian just spinning his car around and driving backwards. And again, we're completely retconning this character to have always been this sort of badass racer that he completely was not in the first film. But you also have just sort of like the callbacks to the first film of someone trying to go underneath a semi and completely failing because this guy gets absolutely pancaked. And we're just kind of glossing over the fact that that man is dead. There is no way that man survived his entire car being steamrolled by an 18-wheeler. But there's no time to dwell on it because we've got other things to do. We've got, drug dealers to snatch up and races to go on and all sorts of stuff. We've got dirty cops to torture with rats and buckets and all sorts of crap. They're just kind of throwing a lot of crazy things in here. And yeah, some of it just kind of feels like an episode of Miami Vice to an extent. I feel like 2Fast2Furious is just something that, I don't know, it feels like it's missing heart. I know that's a silly thing to say. And again, you kind of have this whole thing where the first film very much had like those soap opera-y elements to them that feel sort of silly but are constructed in such a way as to make them palatable to the audience. And you're kind of missing that from 2Fast2Furious. And what they replace it with, a lot of it does work, but you still have certain things that just kind of make the overall production feel off, and it's hard to explain. And don't get me wrong, I feel like it's a perfectly fine film to sit and watch if you've got other things that you're doing in the meanwhile. I don't think it's aggressively terrible, but it's definitely a step down for me. I think there's an overly plastic look about the film, and I feel like there are just certain things that I wish could have been a little bit tighter with. And even when you have the ending where it looks like, oh, Brian and Roman are gonna ride off into the sunset and maybe pull a few more scams and do some other stuff, you kind of throw that by the wayside and then lead into Brian's return with Fast and Furious, which we'll eventually talk about. But yeah, there's just so much about it that feels like something that was sort of done, off on a tangent from what the original Fast and Furious was doing. And it's tough to kind of say, confidently whether I love or dislike the film. And I think that's something that we'll definitely get into when we talk about a little movie called The Fast and the Furious Tokyo Drift. So stay tuned for that one. Hey guys, thanks for watching as always. If you've got your own thoughts or opinions on 2Fast2Furious that you would like to share, go ahead and leave a comment in the section below. Don't forget to hit the like button, hit the notification bell, share this video with your friends and family, and if you'd like to keep up to date on more At Random videos, you can go ahead and click the subscribe button right over here.